Today's video will be about 35mm prime lenses for SONY Mirrorless full-frame cameras. As the title of this video says, I will be comparing the SONY 35mm f1.4 with the Sigma 35mm f1.2. When it comes to these two lenses, there are some things I consider to be important. So in this video, I will be comparing the Sigma and the Sony in these categories, and then I will tell you my opinion. But now, let's get started. Alright, so let's start with photos, as there are more parameters I can compare. So the first category I would like to talk about is the light capturing capability. We are talking about f1.4 and f1.2, so it's pretty safe to say that these are really fast prime lenses. This means you can safely use these lenses for low light situations, for photos and videos, and you will be able to capture enough light to make your exposure correct. So on these two photos, I would like to show you the difference between the f1.2 and the f1.4. The photo on the left side was captured with the Sigma f1.2 at the f1.2 actually, and with the shutter speed 1/800. Now on the right side there is a photo captured with the Sony 35mm f1.4 at f1.4 actually, and the shutter speed was set to 1/1250. I was trying to keep the ISO as low as possible, and in this example I was really curious about the difference in shutter speed settings while maintaining the same exposure. Now, as you can see, the shutter speed difference between the f1.2 and f1.4 is 1/450. This one was pretty obvious because, well, with the f1.2 you will capture more light obviously than with the f1.4. So this category goes naturally to Sigma f1.2. Let's move on to the next category, which is vignetting. Now let me show you two really boring photos of the grass, but hold on, you will be able to see the difference much better on these photos than on some kind of fancy portrait. So the first photo was taken with the Sigma 35mm f1.2. Again, I've stepped down to the f1.2 because that's really the interesting thing about this lens. Now let's switch to the second photo, which was taken with the Sony 35mm f1.4. Again, I stayed at the f1.4 because that's also the biggest selling point of this lens too. So as you can see, this category will obviously go to the Sony 35mm f1.4 because it has less vignetting than the Sigma does at the f1.2. Don't get me wrong, it's not really a big deal because it's really easy to get rid of these vignettes in Lightroom, for example. However, if you don't want to have that vignetting in your photos, it's one more step in post-production for you. However, you should really be considering the next category when buying a new lens, and that category is detail. Many people are referring to this category also as sharpness, but in my opinion it's not the sharpness because you can add the sharpness back in post, and you cannot really add back the detail to the photo if it was not captured correctly. Once again, I will show you two photos, but this time I will zoom in to 200%, so you will be able to see those small details and also the difference between these two lenses. So let's start with the photos of the grass again. On the left side you can see a photo taken with the Sigma 35mm f1.2, and on the right side there is photo taken with the Sony 35mm f1.4. Obviously, if you will be shooting at f4, 5.6 or even higher, the photos will be much sharper and there will be maybe more detail in these photos. However, I wanted to see the difference at these low aperture numbers. As you can see on this first set of photos, Sigma has more detail at f1.2 than Sony has at f1.4. I was not expecting this to happen, but it's really great. Now let's compare the chromatic aberration that is produced by Sigma and by Sony. This is a really great example because there is a thin object and the bright sky really directly behind this object. So once again, on the left side there is the Sigma, and on the right side there is the photo taken with the Sony. There is some chromatic aberration on both of these lenses, which I really expected, but I think that the Sigma has more pleasing chromatic aberration to the eye, is more natural looking than on the Sony. You have to make your own decision on this category because it's really up to your taste, I believe. However, for me, this category goes to the Sigma. Next category is really subjective, and that is the color. When I was comparing these two photos, I was naturally inclined towards the photo taken with Sigma. In my opinion, the colors are really smooth and the photo overall looks really great. The Sony also produces really nice images, and I would not notice any bad difference or any difference at all if I wasn't comparing these two photos side by side. However, according to my personal preference, I like the Sigma more. Now the last but not least category is the depth of field. I believe that many people who are considering buying the Sony 35mm f1.4 or the Sigma f1.2 are considering one of these lenses also because of the shallow depth of field. Let me put it this way. If you are deciding mainly based on the shallow depth of field, meaning that you want to be able to blur the background as much as it is possible, these lenses are pretty equal. You have to be nitpicking to see that small difference. But ask yourself a question. Will your clients or your audience really care that much about the 0.2 difference in the aperture? You will have to answer this question, but I guess that this won't be the case for most people out there. Now let's talk about video for a moment. I believe that most things that I've mentioned earlier also apply to the video world, so I will not repeat them. Now the two really important things that are left in the video world, at least for me, are low light capabilities and autofocus. These are by no means the most important things in filmmaking in general, but they are really important for my style of shooting, which for most of the time is one-man band, or also called run and gun style of shooting. So first of all, low light performance. So one lens is f1.4 and the other is f1.2, so both are pretty fast. My fastest lens to this date is the 35mm f1.8, which is really great, so even the f1.4 should be gorgeous. Now let me show you some low light examples taken here in my home studio. So the first example was shot with the Sigma at f1.2 with the ISO 640. The whole scene was lit just by the monitor and the practical lamp behind me. I also have to mention that those Philips Hue bulbs were set to only 50% of the intensity. Then I have lowered the ISO a bit to 200 and added the aperture 120D at 10% of the intensity. The result wasn't surprising, but I was still blown away. Usually I shoot these videos with my 16-35 f4, and if I want to keep the ISO down at 320 for example, I have to set the intensity of my 120D to approximately 50-60%. Now here is one example shot with the Sony or Zeiss 35mm f1.4. As you can see, both lenses are really great and you don't even need any fancy light for these kind of videos. All you need is a laptop. However, if you have a dedicated light, you really don't have to go that high with the intensity. and I mean it for both lenses. Next up is autofocus. Manual focusing can be really challenging because you need to be really focused on maintaining that correct focus, if you know what I mean. You need to be a director, you need to be focused on exposure, on lighting, on story, and also on focusing. However, if you want to use the autofocus, it really needs to be reliable. Now, let's go through some really basic face tracking autofocus tests. So what is the result of this video? Which one is the best 35mm prime lens for your SONY Mirrorless camera? When you look at the score, the obvious winner is Sigma. However, you may have a different score, so take my results just as something to think about. But let me talk a little bit more about the autofocus. At first, I thought that the Sony has much better and reliable autofocus, and it may be true, but I would need much more time to spend with these two lenses. As you just saw in the face tracking autofocus test, the Sigma was slower than Sony, but it was smoother at the same time. So which one is better? I also took these two lenses out to shoot a small B-roll sequence in real-world conditions. Here I have experienced the real-world autofocus performance of both lenses. To be honest, I had hard time shooting with Sigma because it had some issues staying on the face and maintaining the focus. So which one should you buy? In my opinion, if you are not that autofocus person, I would go for the Sigma 35mm F1.2. Also, if you are more photo than video person, I would also recommend the Sigma 35mm F1.2. The only reason I would go for the Sony or Zeiss would be the autofocus. It's not that much better than the Sigma, but it didn't fail in the real-world scenario, so for example, for my wedding films, it would be a better option. And what is your opinion? Do you have some different experiences? Is autofocus a big thing for you, or are you a manual focus person? I would really like to start a discussion with you. So that's it for today. If you are new here, consider subscribing to my channel because there are more videos to come. Also hit the bell so you will get notified whenever I post new video. Give this video a like because it really makes a difference, and I will see you next time.